Hello everyone, I'm Tarun, co-founder of Copperx, and today we have Akansh with us. He's a co-founder of PrimeVault, and we are going to chat about stablecoin payments, cross-border payments with you today.
Yeah.
So Akansh, we would like to start with your introduction, your background, and what you're doing at PrimeVault.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm one of the co-founders of PrimeVault, and essentially what is PrimeVault? We're an all-in-one infrastructure which is focused on institutions and fintechs and payment companies. And the idea here is that, if you want to launch your digital asset operations, manage it or scale it, you can do it in a few minutes. Whatever the financial use case may be, you can spin it up using our infra. And the idea here is just to explain it in more depth, what we've done is we've built the end-to-end financial stack, and that has a lot of layers built into it so that, everything at the end of the day is abstracted out for you. And all you need to do is just sign up on us and build your financial use case. So the way this works is that the first layer is the wallet infra, and that's what we've built in-house, and that's the key of the business, which is security. And that ensures that, either as an institution like a bank or a fintech, your own treasury or your own assets are super secure. But just not that, you can have wallets spun up, embedded wallets essentially in your app for all your users as well. Once we secure the assets, the second layer is programmatic workflows. So in the case of a cross-border remittance company, it's moving it from point A to point B or automating any workflows. We've built a bunch of automations, so that makes it super simple to do any kind of use case. Or it could be an institution which wants to trade on exchanges. All of that has been built end to end. All the pipes have been connected essentially. But just not that, because the blockchain layer is so complex, there are multiple chains, multiple tokens. We also have a liquidity execution layer. So that makes sure that, you're able to do any kind of execution through us. The third thing is that, as of course you're more mature as a company, you would also want access to DeFi. And that is something which we do through APIs as well. So let's say, for example, you're an institution which wants to do some DeFi, or say, for example, your users or your businesses want to deploy their assets in some yield-bearing, financial product. You could do all of that through PrimeVault. And the idea for you here is that, hey, I want to scale my business really fast in this particular space, but I don't want to sit and worry about my keys, my custody, the various blockchains, the liquidity. I don't want to take all of that headache. I just want to make sure that my operations are running smooth, and I'm making sure that I'm giving the best experience to the users.
Correct.
And that's what we ensure as an infra company.
Correct. I would like to go a little bit back into the history, right? So how did you come across, let's say, crypto coin, and how did you land into building PrimeVault?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So for me personally, at a personal level, I mostly struggled a lot with basically the global rails that exist, whether it was, moving money, for my brother's education, just some things as simple as that, sending money to Europe, few business days with some, loss of 5-6% of just transfer fees. But also for me, the biggest fascination around the space was the idea to remove all entities, all middlemen, so as to speak, and just have a way of, moving assets from point A to point B instantaneously. And also, I think the biggest motivation for our team was most of the team comes from Rippling, and our team essentially built the payroll and the payments product there. And we saw this at a global scale on how painful this was. Just to process payroll every month meant super inefficient rails. Just to process the fees that was taken, the number of days that were gone, the number of calls just to get money, your own money to reach your own employees. And that's when we were this needs to change.
Correct. What did you used to do at Ripple?
Yeah, so at Rippling, my co-founders, basically what they did is the payroll product was essentially of course, your dashboards to manage your employees, their salaries and their taxes. But that's the one piece of it, right? You need to make sure that, all of that is computed well across different geographies.
Correct.
But the second piece was you need to make sure that your employees are getting paid.
Correct.
Now, this gets really challenging because the way was I can obviously go deeper if this is interesting, but basically you had to make sure that all the companies are first paying you 3-4 days in advance because there's ACH and all of this.
Correct.
So that's not instantaneous. Once the money reached our bank, then we had to pay Swift fees for per employee, right? So that's $20, for example. That's the cost.
Yes.
Today we complain about gas fees, but
Yeah.
you get it. And then you had to wait like 3 to 4 business days, hoping that it reaches. And then if
Correct.
the employees didn't receive money, they would be like, okay. And then, they're calling us and we're calling a bank and the bank is calling someone else.
Correct.
Super painful. And then even eventually when the employee received the money, the local bank had like their own decided FX rate.
Correct.
So this is like very, very inefficient, right? And that's why like this needs to change.
Correct.
Hopefully
Correct.
we all change this.
Yeah, correct. So how, like, what do you think, what is the better version look like with stablecoins? Like,
I mean, the best version eventually looks like, for a business, I need to pay my vendor or I need to pay my employee, on whatever date it is. The day I decide to do that, it's instantaneous.
correct.
It's lossless of any fees.
Correct.
And it should be like in a few minutes,
Yeah.
not 3 to 4 days. And like that makes businesses efficient. Like that helps better capital management. You're not like losing money. And it's just more efficient. Like all these dollars are essentially being lost, which could be like used for something else.
Correct.
And just not that, right? Like the next thing is like when you have access to like say a global dollar or like some global currency, the next use case is like how you can make better use of this treasury that you have. Like that's the part where you get into DeFi and a bunch of different things. But
Correct.
yeah, the first level is like, I just want my money to reach point A to point B and it's my money.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to take so much time to get it.
Correct. Correct. And like how, companies or fintechs are using PrimeVault right now? What are the, few
Yeah.
use cases that you're seeing
Yeah.
and helping with?
Yeah, so we basically work with a bunch of fintechs like on-off ramps and like payment companies. We also work with like stablecoin market makers. And the way this works is like, let's say you're a fintech. Let's take like, you're an on-off ramp in say LATAM. Like that's one of our customers. What they do is that they have like millions of users, say for example. Instantaneously, what they can do is they can spin up like millions of wallets for their users. And these users can essentially like put assets in those wallets. And the second degree of complexity is the number of chains that you support. So whether it's Tron, Ton, or Solana, or whatever that is. So that's the first thing that we do. Then the second piece is like you want to move money from point A to point B. So it
Correct.
could be like moving outside or within Latin America. And then we have a bunch of partners which on-off ramp as well. So say for example, it's US to like Argentina or Mexico or somewhere else. That's something which we give as well.
Correct.
So for this particular fintech, like all it took was like 1 to 2 weeks to like start this, embed this, and they could start like having like digital assets for their users. And then obviously once the users have stablecoin, like they can pay locally, they can hold the dollar if they choose to.
Correct.
So that's how they use us.
Correct. And like with with stable coins, like which one do you think is the biggest opportunity right now that you are like excited about?
You mean USDC versus USDT?
No, I mean for stable coins, like the
Okay,
use
like
cases.
that. I think the biggest opportunity first would be like, I would say like cross-border remittance, and I would say then maybe payroll.
Okay.
And then eventually what this will look like in my sense is that it'll probably eat into, because once you start holding stable coin, I mean like the whole like lending and the investment product will build in. So I think like that's the eventual goal. Like that's how like fintech will get disrupted first with payments, payroll, and then banking.
Okay. Makes sense. Good. Perfect. So let's move to like, examples of real life adoption of stable coins.
Yeah.
So I would like to know like, where are you seeing the most activity of stable coins, in which market, geographies, and what are the unique use cases that you are seeing across the globe?
Yeah. So I think the adoption we're seeing the most is in, I would say, emerging markets, which is basically LATAM and I would say Africa.
Okay.
There we're seeing like heavy usage of crypto or like stable coins. And I think there are 2 or 3 reasons why people are using that.
Okay.
I'd say the first reason is that, again, like, if you just want to pay someone, it can be instantaneously done at a certain level, like, scan a QR code and
Okay.
actually pay someone. And, you can transfer stablecoin for some services. The second big reason I think is that basically like in a lot of these markets, like their local currency is currently like fluctuating and a lot of people are using it as a hedge.
Okay.
So like to park their, their treasury or their, like their bank balance.
Yeah.
And that's one big reason why people are doing that. And the third reason, which we're also seeing emerge, is that, once you have like stable coin, and if you're a mature enough user, you also start realizing that there are a bunch of opportunities where you can make your treasury more efficient.
Okay.
Which means that, hey, like I have some stable coin lying around, can I put it in some yield product? If you're able to, if you're able to abstract that out, like, and if they're able to like understand that,
Yeah.
they'll also like put that into yield. So then it's just a more efficient use of money. So the first thing is that, hey, it's efficient to pay. Secondly, I want to hedge against like, my local currency.
Correct.
And thirdly, like, make more productive use of it.
Okay. And where do you see like stablecoin, like growth will happen in next 12 months the most?
I think it's still very early in LATAM and Africa. So I think the first strongest use case will be there. I think like next 12 months, I know a lot of people on the ground working on this.
With geography?
Again, the same, LATAM and Africa. And then I would say Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Like I'm seeing like some early trends, but it's still yet to come. So I think at least personally for us, we're focusing on those markets, and then we're still exploring the other markets. But I would still say that it's still early days, early game. So like the next 12 months, most companies are focusing on that.
Have you seen any unique use case or any unique story of people using stablecoins?
I think we haven't seen yet, but I'm just trying to think. I don't have an answer for that, but like we're seeing like vertical use cases starting to emerge.
Okay.
So something like, like processing payroll, for example.
Okay.
So it's just not like, hey, I want to make a payment, but it's also like as a contractor or as a freelancer, I want to start, having some stable coin in my bouquet of like all the assets that I hold.
Okay.
But it's still not unique.
Okay. Okay. And what do you think is the biggest challenge right now for a non-crypto business?
Yeah. That's actually a very good question.
Yeah, like let's say, we want like as a stablecoin pioneer, like we all want that everybody should use it. But like, what do you think is the biggest issue, UX issue?
I think the biggest issue is basically, I don't have anything against any particular chain, but I think as an end user, the only thing I care about is this is $1 in my bank account.
Yeah.
This is $1 in stablecoin.
Correct.
And hopefully when I send it to someone else, it's $1 still.
Correct.
The challenge is that there are multiple blockchains, multiple, like different methods of doing gas.
Correct.
And all of those things. And as a Web2 user, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
And B, it's extremely complex.
Yeah.
So there has to be some degree of like some chain abstraction.
Yeah.
Where all I care about is what's the fastest way to move it and the most efficient way without losing, like any percentage.
Correct.
The last thing I want to do is like, A, I don't even know what this chain means.
Yeah.
And then B, like, I need to now bridge it, but I don't even have gas to do this.
Correct.
And that is just very, very complex. So if the onboarding is so complex, then just using of that will also be very, very difficult. And I've personally seen this in my own use cases, right?
Yeah.
Like when I have to like say pay a friend in stablecoin,
Yeah.
and he asks me, pay me in this token in this chain.
Correct.
I have to do like 5 things to just make sure it happens.
Correct.
Which is not efficient.
Correct. And how are you like trying to solve it? Like, are you doing something to solve it, or some features you can just?
So for that, like we're trying to work with certain partners where what we're trying to do is like have a cross-chain settlement layer. So which is where we're working with partners is that, hey, like try to abstract out what chain it is, and like, let's say you're using chain A and they want to pay in chain B. You can send that money, you can send that instruction, but at the back end, what's the most efficient way to bridge it and do that?
Correct.
If it's 2 different chains.
Correct.
So we'd work with a bunch of liquidity partners, like or stablecoin market makers,
Okay.
or like decentralized protocols to be able to do this. So like a wormhole or like some stablecoin market makers would actually make sure that the cross-chain settlement happens.
Correct.
And that's abstracted out. It's still not obviously the most efficient. Like that's something which say a particular chain or a protocol has to build this yet for the industry. But today it's like a patchwork of a bunch of different players trying to do this.
Correct.
But we try to do all of this so that we can make the fintech's life as easy as possible.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think like stablecoins will replace banks? Like, what is your take on that? Because let's say in emerging markets also, right?
Yeah.
You told me that you are seeing adoption in
Yeah.
LATAM region, African region, right? And somewhat sign in SCA market, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you think banks will get replaced, or what is your thinking on that?
So that's a controversial, I would not say controversial, but I think, so the reality is that the reason why everyone wants to issue stable coin is like to control the float or the yield.
Okay.
And the moment you don't have your own stable coin, which means you lose the yield. And say, for example, my gut feeling here is that every bank or fintech will try to launch their own stable coin because it want to either keep the yield or pass on the yield
Yeah.
and make some cut.
Correct.
So yes, so I think like stable coins will eat into banking,
Okay.
and banks will have to innovate to make sure that they're able to protect the revenue that they're generating.
Correct.
So the short answer is that I feel stablecoin will eat into banking unless banking comes up first and starts doing this.
Yeah. That's a good take for sure.
Yeah.
And do you see like banks will also start issuing their own stable coins?
I think so. I feel that they'll do this because like let's say you issue a stable coin and then you park it into some treasury and you generate that yield. If it's someone else doing that, and if let's say company X is doing that and they're keeping the yield, that means they're making the money. And now let's say there's global adoption of stablecoin and everyone's using stablecoin.
Correct.
Which means like no one's keeping money in the banks because they're keeping in their own non-custodial wallets.
Correct.
So what's the use of, I don't mean like in that way, but you get what I mean. Like, so they will have to launch something to make sure that the treasury lies with them or the stablecoin lies with them.
Correct. Yeah. I think like as we are touching on stable coins, I would like to go deeper into two things. So
yeah,
like recently, recently is like in last 3 years, we have started seeing different variants of stable coins.
Yeah.
Right. So would love to like hear more from you, like what kind of stable coins are you dealing with? Have you seen? What is your take on each one of them?
So of course, I think the most like two popular ones are USDC and USDT. And of course, they have their own market cap. So they're the ones which are doing well. I think there are two emerging sort of stable coins, I would say,
Okay.
which I think may or may not disrupt, which is one is the ability for you, like, maybe through like a bridge or someone else to launch your own yield bearing stable coin. So say, for example, today, like, Copperx's businesses, hold some USD, and then you're able to give them some yield bearing stable coin, which is not USDC.
Yeah.
That means you're able to actually pass on the yield to them. So that will slowly start eating into possibly because like everyone wants to pass on the yield, right? Right now, if you hold stablecoin, you don't get any yield unless you put it in some DeFi protocol. The second one, which I am more personally curious and interested in, is the synthetic stablecoin. Like that's obviously a whole different conversation, but what I mean is, I personally am like excited to see how like an Ethena plays out. I think that's a very, very interesting, like the likes of Ethena, I mean, is a very, very interesting take on stablecoin.
And any other than Ethena, like?
No, I think like I would mostly be like this one, and then of course there's like Paxos and a bunch of others which are launching different stablecoin. I think the other thing which will happen, in my opinion, is that of course USDC is like or USD is probably the biggest one. Will you have localized stablecoins come up? It's still a very small percentage, very, very small, but I think it's important to launch it in a way because it'll make the rails more efficient. What I mean by that is that today it is USD to USDC, and then USDC has to move to like it has like let's say it's in Mexico, so it'll have to like you'll have to convert USDC to like peso. So that's like inefficient versus like when you have USD to USDC and then USDC, then you have like a peso version of like that.
Yeah.
So that, and then you have to off ramp it. It's like there is no spread.
Correct.
So that's eventually the game, but I think that's very far ahead.
Yeah. I would like to touch upon, as you are into infra and there is a lot of tech and security involved, right? What is your view on algorithmic stablecoins?
I mean, like, I know the industry has had its own sort of like, ups and downs, but of course, like, I think like in any innovative path breaking industry, like, when you're trying to disrupt, like, things may go wrong, which is of course not something which you want.
Yeah.
But the reason I personally think it's very interesting is because even today, when you say stablecoin is decentralized or like, it's programmatic, in the end, it still lies with particular banks, the yield or like the final asset, which means that tomorrow, and this is like in today's world, nothing is out of the way, that bank could potentially go down or like something could go wrong, which is where, and we've seen that happen as well in TradFi, which could actually affect the stablecoin, for example. depeg it. In the case of a synthetic stablecoin, if you're able to like build it in a way which can manage the peg, and it, of course, there could be edge use cases which could like affect it. But if it doesn't, then I think that's super because it is not dependent on any centralized entity. Like there is no endpoint that exists. Like it's algorithmic. It doesn't have any entity, of course, other than the company that runs it. There is no, you're not held hostage by any government or bank. If tomorrow, today the regulatory environment is better, but 5 years, 10 years down the line, it may completely turn over.
Yeah.
So that's still in my head. Synthetic stablecoin still maintains that decentralized and like sort of thesis essentially.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it for sure makes sense when we talk more about algorithmic stablecoin. Let's do rapid fire. USDC, USDT, or any other.
Controversial, but synthetic algorithmic stablecoin.
Nice. Do you pay your friends in fiat or stablecoin?
I would love to pay in stablecoin, but that's why we need to bring Web2 to Web3, so it's fiat.
Yeah.
Still.
One founder or a company in this space that you deeply respect?
I think Circle. They've built it in a way where a traditional company is built, and potentially like Jeremy, like the long term, if they execute, I think like that's eventually like the 10-20 year line. I think like that's something which they're doing very solid.
Nice. Your favorite chain for building with stablecoins?
We work with a lot of foundations, so pass.
Most underrated chain for payments today?
I take a bet on maybe like Cello.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last thing you paid for crypto with?
I bought a mobile phone with crypto.
Nice, good one. Yeah. This is good one. First Fortune 500 company pays dividend in USDC.
I'd say Apple.
Okay. Good bet for sure.
It's a crazy bet. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I could have said like any of the fintechs, but that's too easy.
Yeah. Which Web2 company will issue stablecoin?
I think like one of the payments fintech companies. So I think like maybe Stripe.
Okay. And
yeah.
non-fintech?
Non-fintech, I would say it would be one of perhaps like the mobile networks or the telecom networks.
Okay.
Because they have their own sort of internal blockchain, or like people hold money, or like businesses hold money.
Yeah.
Or transact with each other. So
absolutely.
That's one version I would say.
Okay. Perfect. I think we are good.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Hope everybody will like the podcast, and thank you so much.